right, we ready to begin? Bring him in. Thank you.
Jurors may be seated. All jurors are present and accounted for, Your Honor.
Thank you, Deputy. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Were you all able to abide by my instructions during the recess? Yes. All right, then let's get started. Mr. Escobar?
Your Honor, the defense would call Joanna Turner.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you shall give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do. Okay. I'm sorry?
Just speak into the mic. You don't have to speak right into it.
Go ahead, Mr. Escobar.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Good morning.
Good morning, Ms. Turner.
Good morning.
Ms. Turner, are you employed?
No, I'm not.
You retired?
I'm retired.
And do you remember when you retired? 2005 sounds accurate?
2004 or 5.
Okay. And would you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what type of business you retired from?
Airline industry.
Okay, and what were you doing at the airline industry?
I was working in the call center.
The call center.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe, tell me if you agree or disagree, you were in the banking industry before that.
Yes, I was.
You were a bank manager, is that correct?
Yes, I was.
Okay, and how long did you do that?
4 or 5 years.
Okay. Now, I'm going to direct your attention to January the 13th of 2014. Can you tell us whether you went to the Cobb Theater that particular day?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and who did you go with to the Cobb Theater that day?
My husband.
Okay, are you still married?
No, I'm not.
Was your husband back then Mark Turner?
Yes.
Okay. You would agree or disagree that when you arrived at the Cobb Theater, the previews were already playing?
Yes.
You would agree with that?
Yes, I agree.
Okay, and so would you agree or disagree that when you went into the Cobb Theater, you sat in the very top row, correct?
Mm-hmm, correct.
In the very last 2 seats of that top row?
Yes.
Is that correct? So if you're looking at the screen here, it would have been that very top row, very right, last 2 seats.
Correct.
And can you tell me who was seated in the last seat and who was seated in the seat just before that? The last seat right next to the aisle, who was seated there?
My husband.
Your husband?
Yeah.
And you were seated?
Next to him.
To the left?
To the left.
Okay. Was there a reason that you all sat there on that aisle?
Yes, we always sit on the aisle.
Okay, is there a reason for
because he's
that?
got a back problem, so sometimes he need to stand up and stretch.
Okay. When you went and sat down and started to watch the previews, what were the lighting conditions at the time in that theater?
It was dim, but you can still see a little bit.
Okay. And what was the noise level? Were the previews playing?
It was loud.
Previews were loud?
Mhm.
Okay. And I'm going to try to take you through, the process of what took place. You're seated there. Did there come a time where you saw a gentleman that was coming into your row, meaning coming from the lobby area or the downstairs, coming up the stairs, and coming into your row A?
Yes.
Okay. And was that gentleman Curtis Reeves?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And so when he came into your row, was he careful in getting through?
I think he was, because it's so small, such a small space.
Okay.
So
And did you see him actually go to his seat?
No,
You were paying attention to what?
to the preview.
To the previews. Now, did you see anyone standing up after Mr. Reeves had passed you to go to his seat?
No, I did not.
Didn't see anybody standing up. You were watching the previews. Is that correct?
Correct.
Objection leading.
Sorry, Your Honor.
Assisting.
Do you agree or disagree that at some point in time, you saw someone standing up that was in the row in front of your row?
Yes, I did.
And can you describe that individual for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury?
Tall, slim.
And when you saw him standing up, would you agree or disagree that he was talking but you could not hear what he was saying?
Correct.
And while he was talking, would you agree or disagree that he was facing the back row?
Yes.
And he would have been facing, you agree or disagree, in the area of Mr. Reeves?
I'm sorry, repeat that again?
You would agree that he was facing the back row where Mr. Reeves was?
In that area, yeah.
Now, would you agree or disagree that while this was taking place, you were both glancing over there and then also looking at your previews?
Agree.
You were interested in those previews?
Yes.
Those previews were, well, let me ask you this question. Do you agree or disagree that some of those previews were action-packed previews?
I couldn't say. I don't recall.
You don't recall the actual previews that were on?
No.
Okay. Now, would you agree or disagree that as this tall gentleman was standing facing in the direction of Mr. Reeves, that you saw an actual throwing motion of a mug or a thermos?
Objection leading.
Agree or disagree?
Overruled.
Would you agree or disagree that you saw this tall gentleman with either a cup or a mug or a thermos in his hand, dark in color, making a throwing motion towards that back row with his left hand?
Objection, this is a leading question.
No, it's not. Overruled.
Would you agree with that?
Yes, I did. I agree.
You agree? Okay. Now, would you agree or disagree that after you saw that throwing motion, your eyes went back to the previews, to watch the previews? Agree or disagree?
Agree.
Would you agree or disagree that that throwing motion that you told the juries about was a quick throwing motion? Quick.
Yes, it is.
Now, would you agree that, or disagree, that about anywhere between 4 to 6 seconds passes
Yes, about.
And would you agree or disagree that now you hear a loud voice, correct?
Correct.
And that loud voice was coming from that tall...
Objection leading.
Would you-
Sustained.
Would you agree or disagree that that loud voice was coming from that tall gentleman that you've just described with this throwing motion?
Agree.
And would you agree or disagree that that gentleman was still standing at the time?
Agree.
Do you remember what that tall gentleman was saying, Mrs. Turner?
I'm texting my daughter, if you don't mind, in that sense.
That's what you remember.
Hmm.
Do you agree or disagree that at that moment you looked over towards Mr. Reeves, correct?
At which moment?
After that statement was made.
No, I was looking at Mr. Oulson.
Mr. Oulson, at some point in time, did you direct your attention back to Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
And do you agree or disagree that what caused you to direct your attention to Mr. Reeves is that you noticed that Mr. Reeves was sitting kind of funny?
Correct.
Would you agree or disagree that what you described as something funny was that Mr. Reeves was leaning towards his left
Agree.
in his chair?
Agree.
Would you agree or disagree that throughout this period of time right now, you didn't hear a peep from Mr. Reeves, right?
Agree.
Would you agree or disagree that it was at this moment, after seeing Mr. Reeves kind of sitting funny, that you noticed a ring of fire and some popcorn?
Popcorn first, and then I hear the gunshot and the ring of fire.
Would you agree or disagree that you did not see any weapon?
No, I did not.
But you would agree that after the ring of fire, would you agree or disagree, that after the ring of fire, you actually saw Mr. Reeves laying a pistol on his left knee?
I believe it's the right knee.
You thought it was a right knee. One of the knees. Is that correct?
Agree.
And would you agree or disagree that immediately after that happened, that you noticed Mr. Reeves's hands going to his head?
Yes.
You agree or disagree that at that point in time you get up out of your chair?
No.
What do?
I waited until this gentleman come up to Mr. Reeves. There's a suggestion of showing a badge and hold out his left hand for his gun. And once I saw Mr. Reeves give this gentleman the gun, that's when I feel safe to stand up.
Okay, and you did. Is that correct?
Yeah, right after that, probably.
Okay. And would you agree or disagree that at that point in time you got up and then shortly thereafter you went down the stairs?
Yes,
Is that correct?
correct.
And would you agree or disagree that at some point shortly thereafter a woman who had been injured approached you
Agree.
and that you assisted her with whatever you had in your hand to control the bleeding?
Agree.
And would you agree or disagree that you then went to that back exit door to assist law enforcement to be able to come in through that back door?
Agree.
Now, would you agree or disagree that at some point thereafter, you joined a group of individuals that were congregating in the theater?
Yes, agree.
And would you agree or disagree that those individuals were in fact talking?
Yes,
group.
agree.
And would you agree or disagree that no police officer ever came up to you and told you you're not supposed to talk about what happened amongst yourself? That never happened.
Agree.
And would you agree likewise that you didn't witness any police officer talking to the group, telling
Objection,
them?
leading.
Sustained.
Would you agree or disagree that at no point in time did you see a police officer approaching the group you were in to say, don't talk about anything that was
I did not.
witnessed here? Now, how long were you down there in that group before you were relocated?
I would say about 10, 15 minutes.
Okay, and was your husband likewise in that group? Mark Turner?
I believe so.
Okay, and is it, would you agree or disagree that Mr. Turner was likewise speaking to individuals within that group?
Agree.
Would you agree or disagree that while you were there in that group, that a voluntary statement was filled out by you?
Agree.
And would you agree or disagree that your husband likewise within that group filled out his voluntary statement?
Agree.
And would you agree or disagree that you told your husband what you had witnessed there in that particular theater, there while you all were in that group?
Disagree.
Where did you tell him your version of what had happened?
I believe after we got moved to the theater across, and we were sitting there waiting for the detective to talk to us, I believe at that time I told him what I saw.
And you told him what you've told the ladies and gentlemen of the jury here today?
Yes.
So you went from the theater in that group to what area of the complex?
I think it's a theater adjacent to that theater.
Okay. And when you went into that adjacent theater, was there a group of individuals, lay people, patrons of the theater that were in that theater as well?
Yes.
And when you went into that second theater, were those individuals likewise talking amongst themselves?
Agree.
And would you agree or disagree that your husband was within that group of patrons in the other theater?
Disagree.
Where was your husband?
He was sitting by me.
But there, what I'm saying, in that theater.
In that theater, we were sitting by ourselves.
Okay. How many people would you say were in that second theater?
20, 25?
20, 25. In that second theater, did you hear any police officer indicate to you and your husband not to discuss your testimony amongst each other?
I did not.
In that theater, did you hear any police officer tell any of the patrons that were there in that theater not to discuss their testimony amongst each other?
No, I did not.
You would agree or disagree that the interview that you had with law enforcement, that was in a cleaning room, right?
I believe so.
And would you agree or disagree that that interview lasted about 10 minutes?
Yes.
I have no further questions.
Cross?
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Stern.
Good morning.
You indicated that when you entered into the theater, the lights were a little bit dim,
Yes.
and even though it was dim, you could see about 5 seats away. Is that fair?
Correct.
All right, and in fact, you could see, based on the lighting conditions in the theater, up to 10 seats away. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
So although we're saying that it's dim, focusing on just the word dim, you could see 10 seats from you, correct?
Correct.
So it was light enough in the theater for you to see.
Yes.
And even though we have heard that the previews were playing, you could still hear, correct?
If I wanted to, yes.
Okay. In other words, you didn't have any difficulty hearing your husband, Mark, who was next to you, right?
No.
And you felt, even though the previews were playing, that you could hear people 5 and 10 seats away if you chose to listen to their conversation. Would that be a fair statement?
Yes.
So the reason you couldn't hear specific words or specific conversations was because you weren't listening for specific words or specific conversations. Is that correct?
Correct.
But you did hear the chattering in the theater, and you could hear that chattering up to 10 seats away. Is that correct?
Correct.
So it obviously wasn't deafening loud in the theater.
It's loud.
Okay, but you could still hear people talking 10 seats away.
Yes.
Would you agree with me that Mr. Reeves, when you saw him, he appeared to be a large man?
Yes.
You indicated that the first time you saw the defendant was when he was coming up the aisle and then walked across your row in order to get to his seat, correct?
Correct.
And based on your life experiences, the way you observed the defendant, you felt that he was rude. Isn't that correct?
At the time, yes.
And when he went through the row, he was trying to avoid people's feet, correct?
I'm sorry, repeat that again?
Was he trying to avoid stepping on people's feet when he went through the row?
My feet, yes.
Okay. But based on your observation of him, he appeared to be rude.
Well, he just didn't say, excuse me, just standing there on my right. So I just moved my feet back so he's gently passed.
Okay, but what I'm asking you is based on everything you observed about the defendant.
She's answered that.
Sustained. Sustained.
I didn't hear I didn't hear your ruling.
Sustained.
All right, so you indicated that you saw the person that was shot standing up, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and did you learn his name?
Not after, not at the time, but after, yes.
Okay, and his name is Chad Oulson?
Correct.
All right. So you indicated that you saw Chad Oulson standing up, is that correct?
Correct.
And at that time, when you first saw him standing up, you thought that Chad Oulson and the defendant here were friends.
Correct.
And that's because the conversation that you were personally witnessing wasn't anything of a violent nature, so to speak.
No, it's not.
Okay, and that was the reason, based on what you were observing, that they were just having a conversation.
Correct.
It didn't concern you at that point.
It did not.
And at that time, Chad Oulson was only standing in place, correct?
Correct.
I'm going to take this in some segments. So the first time you see Chad Oulson standing, there was nothing that gave you any concern in the theater, correct?
Correct.
So at this point, when you see Chad Oulson, he was not reaching over to attack or punch or do anything to the defendant, correct?
Correct.
Wasn't making any threatening statements to the defendant, correct?
Correct.
And that's the reason why you went back to watch the previews, correct?
Correct.
Now, you indicated that at some point in time, you saw what you believe to be an object, right?
Correct.
And you said that this object appeared to you to be a thermos, correct?
Correct.
So when you say thermos, you're talking about something that you would drink out of, correct?
Correct.
Now, you'd agree with me that a thermos, or something that looks like an object you would drink out of, does not look like a cell phone, correct?
Correct.
And in fact, you could definitively state, meaning you could state with certainty that it was not a cell phone, correct?
Correct.
Now, you indicated that you thought you saw a throwing motion, correct?
Correct.
You did not see any objects thrown, though, correct?
Correct.
And the object that you were talking about seeing was this thermos, this drinking object, correct?
Correct.
At the time that you saw this throwing motion of this thermos, did you hear the defendant say anything to the effect of, ow, I was hit, anything at all like that?
I did not.
In fact, you didn't hear the defendant say anything at all, correct?
Correct.
Since you were looking in that direction, you didn't see the defendant react as if he had been hit by an object, correct?
Correct.
For example, let's say an object was thrown and it hit somebody. Generally, people grab that area of their body that they're hit.
Object is to generally people, that's totally speculative.
It's common sense.
Overruled.
If people are hit by an object, they would grab the part of their body that they were hit, correct?
Correct.
You did not see that happen, did you?
I did not.
And at that time, when you're talking about this throwing motion of a thermos, you did not see Chad Oulson jumping or going into your aisle, correct?
Correct.
You didn't see Chad Oulson virtually on top of this defendant, did you?
No, I did not.
Did you hear the defendant yelling, no, no, no?
No, I did not.
Did you hear him yelling, whoa, whoa, whoa?
No, I did not.
Did you see the defendant holding his left arm out to prevent an incredible attack that was coming?
No, I did not.
Now, although you indicated that Chad Oulson said something, you indicated that he was not yelling loud. Isn't that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay. So although he was loud, you would say that he was firm.
Correct.
So he wasn't yelling and screaming, he was just firm in telling the defendant that he was texting his daughter.
Correct.
And you think that he even said, do you mind? Or some words to that effect.
Correct.
So at this point, Chad Oulson's just standing, facing the defendant, correct?
Correct.
And in a firm voice, not yelling or threatening, said that he was texting his daughter.
Correct.
And it's during this time that you say that you see the defendant leaning backwards or leaning to the left.
Leaning to the left.
Okay. Now, you don't know if he was reaching for a firearm at that point, do you?
No idea.
Because if he was leaning to the left at that point, the only thing that was happening was Chad Oulson was in front of him, just telling him, I'm texting my daughter, correct?
Correct.
You didn't see anything that was life-threatening at that point, correct?
Correct.
And at this point, when you said that you saw the defendant doing something, Mr. Oulson wasn't jumping into your row, correct?
Correct.
And at that point, you didn't hear the defendant yelling, "No, no, no," or "Whoa, whoa, whoa."
Correct.
In fact, you never heard the defendant yelling, "No, no, no," or "Whoa, whoa, whoa."
Correct.
And you never saw the defendant reaching his left hand out as Chad Oulson was virtually on top of him, correct?
Correct.
Now, isn't it true that at no time, well, let me ask you it this way. Was there a female you indicated, was it Nicole Oulson, who you met with later on, who had her finger that was shot off?
Yes.
Okay. At no time did you see her fighting with Chad, correct?
No, I didn't see her at all.
Okay. So when you never saw her ever? Well, up until the point in time that you helped her with her hand?
Correct.
Okay. So by that answer, you're saying that you never saw her holding Chad Oulson back?
No, I did not.
You never saw her having this struggle with Chad where he was trying to get into your row, correct?
Correct.
You never saw Chad Oulson punch the defendant, correct?
Correct.
At no time did you ever hear the defendant here, and I know we were talking about with the throwing of the throwing motion. I'm talking about at no time. At no time did you ever hear the defendant say anything that led you to believe that he was hit.
Correct.
At no time did you ever see him lean over as if he was struck by holding a part of his body.
Correct.
The only time that you saw him holding his head or rubbing his head was after he fired the shot.
Yes.
Let's talk about this possible throwing motion. Isn't it true that you're not even sure that you saw that?
I'm pretty sure I saw it.
Okay. Would it refresh your memory if I showed you a copy of your deposition?
Sure.
May I approach the witness?
You may.
And for counsel, I'm looking at page 73, 74, 77, and 82. Okay, first, I'm looking at page 77. Can you read lines 17 through 20 to yourself?
To myself?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. After reviewing your deposition, isn't it true that you indicated that you weren't 100% sure?
At the time, I was telling Mr.
Well-
Escobar, right? This is
Yes. I mean, what I'm asking you is, in the deposition, did you indicate to Mr. Escobar that you were not 100% sure?
yes.
Page 82.
Judge, I'm going to ask under the doctrine of completeness that he read all those lines that she read because I believe it puts it in context.
If that's the case, then
I'll continue down to 24.
I think you started at 73, did you not?
I was at 77.
Well, you started to tell me it was 73, and there is conversation in 73 concerning the black.
Right, that was, we have to approach.
yeah. Overruled.
Okay, so going back to the question, you indicated that you were not 100% sure, correct?
I'm not 100%.
Okay. Page 82, lines 22 on page 81 through line 4 on page 82. So this part right here, just read that to yourself. Yes. Okay, upon reading that, does that refresh your memory that you indicated, I think I saw a cup in his hand, that little throwing motion?
Yes.
Okay, so you'd agree with me, you said you think.
Mm-hmm.
You gotta answer it loud, sorry.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. And would you agree with me, the way you were testifying, you said the word throwing motion. But isn't it true that you actually saw something that moved real quick and not a throwing motion?
Can you rephrase that question?
Yes. The motion that you saw, was it just a real quick movement towards the defendant, not a throw?
Yeah, it's just a quick motion,
Okay, so it was not a throw.
not a throw.
And again, during this time that we're talking about, this quick movement that was not a throw, you didn't think anything was happening that you had to pay attention to, correct?
Correct,
And that's why you went back to watch the theater previews.
correct.
And that quick motion you're talking about, you didn't even think that was in a threatening manner because you still thought they were just friends.
Correct.
And you heard the gunshot after the popcorn, correct?
Correct.
Did you see Chad Oulson walk down the aisle and fall down in front of the other people?
Yes, I did.
And was that fairly quickly after the gunshot?
I think it take about 2-3 seconds when he started walking.
Okay, and then he fell at the feet of other moviegoers?
No, he walked like 2 steps.
Okay,
like
so
he's
after he
gonna
was shot, he
exit.
took 2 steps and then he fell.
Yes.
Can I have a moment, Your Honor?
You may.
I want to talk about the times after the shooting when the police became involved. when you went down by the screen after the shooting, you'd say that there was less than 20 people down there, correct?
Correct.
When you were given the written statement, you weren't given any instructions, correct?
No.
No, you weren't given instructions.
Correct.
And you were asked if Mark had spoken to anybody. You remember that question?
No.
Okay, well, defense counsel asked you whether or not your husband, Mark, had spoken to anybody in the theater after the shooting.
Oh, yes.
Did
Correct.
you hear what they spoke about?
No, I did not.
So you have absolutely no idea what they talked about?
No, I did not.
And when you agree with me that although the people that were in the theater were still in the theater, they were scattered around the theater,
Correct.
and you and Mark actually separated yourself from other people?
The theater across?
Correct.
Correct.
And when you filled out your written statement, you filled it out separate from your husband.
Correct.
In fact, wouldn't you say that it was very quiet with all those people for a couple of hours?
Correct.
And if other people were talking, you have no idea what other people were talking about.
No, I did not.
Okay, you did not know what other people were
I do
talking
not
about.
know.
So if you just heard some chatter, you can't say specifically what they were chattering about.
Correct.
Can I have one more moment, Your Honor?
You may.
Thank you, ma'am. I don't have any further questions.
Oh, you're welcome.
Redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Ms. Turner again.
Good morning.
Ms. Turner, you remember having a hearing here back in 2017 and being placed under oath. You remember that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Page 265, lines 3 through 6. Remember the following questions that was asked of you by me.
I have an objection as far as the form,
Yeah.
what we're doing here.
Is there a question or?
Oh, yeah, it was her previous statement that
Well-
I am now, can we approach?
Yeah.
Would you show the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what you meant by a throwing motion? You would agree or disagree, it was Mr. Oulson's left hand, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Just show the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what you believe you saw in the form of a throwing motion. You saw this? Okay. And what you're saying is that what was in that hand, you believe to be a dark object. Would you agree or disagree?
Agree.
And would you agree or disagree when you went to the theater that day, it was not to pay attention to all of the other patrons in that theater, but instead it was to watch the previews and eventually watch the movie, correct?
Correct.
And would you agree or disagree that that is what you were focused on, correct?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to beyond the scope of cross-examination. This is just doing the direct again.
It's well within the scope.
I'll overrule.
Would you agree that's what your focus when you went to the theater is to watch the previews and watch the movie, correct?
Correct.
And I believe you told the prosecution on cross-examination that 10 seats away in that theater, you could hear what people were saying to each other. Is that what you're telling us today?
No.
You would agree or disagree the reason that you couldn't hear, you heard some chatter, but the reason you couldn't hear what was being said was because the previews were loud.
Correct. And I wasn't paying attention, trying to hear what people are saying.
And you would agree that when, agree or disagree, that when Mr. Oulson first stood up and turned around, you couldn't even hear what he was saying at that moment, correct? When he
No, I
first stood
wasn't
up.
paying attention. Yes.
And you couldn't hear it, right? You couldn't tell this jury exactly what he was saying, right?
No.
And the reason you couldn't do that is because the previews were loud, correct?
This is leading.
I will rephrase it, Your Honor.
Sustained.
You would agree or disagree that the reason you couldn't hear that is because the previews were loud.
Correct, but I wasn't paying attention.
You weren't paying attention either.
Right.
And so you would agree or disagree the only time that you decided to, hey, I'm going to look over there, was because you were being distracted from the previews that you were.
Your Honor, this is leading.
That is leading, sustained.
Would you agree that the only reason you looked to your left and distracted from the previews is because you heard something going on over there, right?
Objection, leading.
That's not.
Sustained.
Now, let's talk a little bit about your husband. He was seated to your right, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And immediately after the flash and the shooting and the gentleman picking up the gun from Mr. Reeves's knee, you decided to get up. Is that correct? Because you felt things were safe at that point.
After the gun is being possessed, yes.
Okay. And that's when you went downstairs. Would you agree or disagree?
I went to the platform, yes.
The platform, down below.
Down below, bottom of the stairs.
Okay. And you would agree or disagree that after that you went to the exit door?
Correct.
And it was only after, you would agree or disagree that it was only after the exit door that you then joined this group that was standing or sitting there in the theater, correct?
Correct.
Individuals that had gone to the theater.
Correct.
Okay. And your husband, would you agree or disagree that he was in that group as well?
Agreed.
Now, on cross-examination, you told the prosecutor that you were pretty sure about this throwing motion, correct, or disagree?
Correct.
And you told this prosecutor, agree or disagree, that you believe that in that throwing motion, in that hand, the left hand, was a dark object.
Correct.
You're pretty sure of that, agree or disagree?
I'm pretty sure.
I have no further questions.
Your Honor, if it's okay, based on recross, I have 5 questions if I could.
Sure. Defense will get the last exam, though.
Thank you. I'm going to be referring to pages 285 and 286. May I approach the witness?
You may. Is there a question?
I'm just going to talk about the lighting and the sound.
Okay.
And going back. Isn't it true that you could see 10 seats away when you were in the theater at the time of the shooting?
Yes.
And isn't it true that although the previews were on, you could hear people 10 seats away at the time of the shooting?
Correct.
I don't have any further questions.
Thank you. Anything further from defense?
No, Your Honor.
May this witness be released?
We have her under subpoena, but she can be released for now.
Okay, you're free to go for now. If you get called back, you'll have to come back.
All right.
Thank you. Who's next?
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you shall give in this call is the whole truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Go ahead, Mr. Escobar.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Sergeant Duff.
Morning, sir.
Would you please state your full name for the record?
David Wayne Duff II.
And Sergeant, would you give the ladies and gentlemen of the jury a little bit of your history concerning your employment? You are
I'm a deputy.
sergeant?
I'm a sergeant with the Pasco County Sheriff's Office. I've been employed at the Pasco County Sheriff's Office since September of 2005. During my time, I've served as a patrol deputy in District 2. I've served as a field training officer, property crimes detective, and a patrol corporal. My current assignment is a patrol sergeant.
Okay. And so you would agree that you are pretty familiar with how to conduct proper investigations, correct?
Yes, sir.
Done it all your career.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to direct your attention to January the 13th of 2014 and ask you if you were called out to the Cobb Theater that day.
I responded out there. Yes, sir.
And when you arrived there, you would agree that you went to the superiors over there to get your assignment for that day.
I did.
Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
This was something you've done before, correct? Go to a location, whether it's a theft or a burglary or what have you, and you're going to be interviewing people, right?
Yes, sir.
You're pretty familiar with that process.
Yes, sir.
And you would agree that on that particular day, you were given the assignment to interview witnesses.
Yes, sir.
Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, in total, you interviewed 6 individuals. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
No one gave you a list of individuals to interview. You were just supposed to go out there and find them.
Yes, sir.
Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And your preference certainly that day would have been to go inside Theater 10 to at the very least be able to view the inside of that theater and any evidence that may have been present there in that theater, right?
Yes, sir.
I mean, the reason that's your preference is that if you get a good layout and you find out where the evidence is at, it's going to allow you to pose appropriate questions to witnesses. You would agree with that?
I would agree with that. Yes, sir.
And you've certainly gone in your lifetime as a law enforcement officer, you've gone to many crime scenes and viewed crime scenes that gave you a great deal of information that you could later use in your investigation, correct?
Yes, sir.
But you weren't allowed to go into the theater that day, were you?
I don't know if allow's the right word, sir. I believe I wasn't afforded an opportunity.
You weren't afforded the opportunity.
Yes, sir.
If you had, you would have done it, without a question.
So, yeah, probably yes, sir.
Okay, now, you first started somewhere in the concession area, is that correct, of trying to find witnesses?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and there was a group of individuals there at that concession area, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
At no point in time did you tell any of those individuals there in the concession area not to speak to each other, correct?
I did not, sir.
In fact, when you approached those individuals, they were actually talking to each other, correct?
I don't recall, sir, specifically on that one.
Well, certainly as far back as your initial classes when you became a police officer, the word contamination, witness contamination, has been taught to you, right?
I'm familiar with the term, yes, sir.
And you would agree with me, the term is that you shouldn't have witnesses to an incident together because you don't want them to contaminate each other with information, right?
In an ideal situation, yes, sir.
Okay. And so there were quite a few police officers there that were sent over to the cop theater, correct?
I don't know the specific numbers, sir. There were several deputies there, yes, sir.
Quite a large group, right?
I don't know how to. There were several deputies there, sir. I don't know whether it would be large or not. I don't know the exact number.
Detectives as well?
Yes, sir.
Upper echelon of brass, correct?
Yes, sir.
In fact, Sheriff Naco was there.
Don't know if the sheriff was there when I was present, sir.
So, first person that you interviewed was an individual by the name of Mr. Perez. Yeah, you can always let me know if you need to refresh your recollection with your report,
Take a look at my.
and I will ask
Yes.
the court if it's appropriate at the time that you need it, okay? Sergeant, you interviewed a Mr. Perez, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you didn't even know, prior to interviewing Mr. Perez, that Mr. Perez had actually filled out a written statement, correct?
Correct.
In fact, when you're interviewing people, that's always the first thing to look at, right?
Depending on the circumstances, not necessarily, sir. I've done interviews with somebody prior to obtaining a written statement.
Why wouldn't you want to read the written statement before you even ask them the first question so that you can get some handle of what this person may have viewed or not viewed?
Do the same thing with a interview, sir.
You would agree you never even looked at that voluntary statement because you didn't even know he had one.
Correct, sir.
So did he come to you without any paperwork at all?
Yes, sir.
And so you didn't ask him, hey, have you filled out a voluntary statement? You never asked him that question?
No, sir, I did not.
You knew that they were passing out voluntary statements. You know what those forms are all like, right?
I know what the forms are. I wasn't aware they had been handed out at that time.
So the individuals that gave you the instructions to interview witnesses there didn't even tell you that?
No, sir, I wasn't given that information.
You never asked Mr. Perez where he was seated in the theater, correct?
No, sir, but referring to my report, Mr. Perez said that the incident occurred 8 to 10 rows behind him.
What does that mean? It all depends upon where Mr. Perez was, right?
Yes, sir.
Was he on the left side? Was he on the right side? Was he on the center? How many people were between him and the incident? Those all would have been great questions, right?
Yes, sir.
In fact, you would have wanted certainly for you to specifically know the seat that Mr. Perez was sitting in, right?
It would have helped with the interview, yes, sir.
You never asked him about the noise level in that theater, correct? At the time of the incident?
No, sir.
You never asked him about the lighting conditions
No,
as well,
sir.
correct?
No, I did not.
You never even asked him specifically what seats this incident took place at.
I did not.
And you yourself were unfamiliar with this scene.
I had been in the cop theater prior to this date, sir, both as a patron and as working off-duty
But
details.
not in Theater 10.
I have been in Theater 10 prior to this date, but not at this incident, sir.
And when was the last time you had been to Theater 10 prior to this incident?
Don't have a specific date, sir. I'd have to determine when I worked the detail or if I saw a movie in there.
Okay. You would agree, would you not, that it is extremely important to try to obtain as much detail as humanly possible from witnesses when you're first interviewing them, correct?
Yes, sir.
You're also agree that it's important to ask those witnesses when you're interviewing them whether they have had discussions with other individuals concerning the incident prior to your interview.
Can you repeat that question, sir?
Sure.
I lost you.
You would agree that it is important to ask the witnesses that you're interviewing whether they have spoken to other witnesses about what those witnesses had seen prior to your interview because of the issue of contamination. You want to know whether, is this a purely statement by this person or has it been influenced by someone else? You would agree that's important.
I would agree that is important, yes, sir.
And in fact, not only is it important, you normally do it.
Yes, sir.
But you didn't do it on this investigation.
No, sir.
You would agree that your interview with Mr. Perez was extremely short?
It was brief. I don't know.
Okay, I'll take brief. It was brief.
Yes, sir.
You never even asked Mr. Perez who discharged the firearm.
I did not.
You then interviewed an individual by the name of Mr. Mickley, correct?
Referring to my report,
Anytime you need to,
Okay.
Your Honor, may I
I-
have him refer if he needs
Yes,
to?
you can refer.
I interviewed Ms. Perez after Mr. Perez.
Okay,
and
we'll
then
do them in that order then.
Okay, yeah, I'm just going off
Yeah.
the report.
Would
So-
it be safe to say that all the questions that I asked you about Mr. Perez, you would answer the same as to Mrs. Perez?
Correct, sir.
Okay, save some time. You then interviewed Mr. Mickley, is that correct?
That would be correct, sir.
Okay. And again, you didn't even know if Mr. Mickley had a voluntary statement that he had filled out,
I did not.
because you never asked him.
I did not.
You didn't ask him where the lighting conditions were?
Did not.
Did not ask him what the noise conditions were?
I did not.
You did not ask him who discharged the firearm?
I did not.
You did not know where he was seated?
I did not.
McCullen. Remember that witness, McCullen?
Yes, sir.
Never asked about the lighting conditions.
No, sir.
Never asked about the noise level.
No, sir.
Never asked about where that person was seated.
Did not.
Didn't even know whether that person had a written statement or not.
No, sir, I did not.
Did not ask him who had discharged the firearm.
Did not.
Did not ask him who was shot with the firearm.
But did not, sir.
Stallmeyer, another witness you interviewed.
Yes, sir.
Same questions, same answers you're going to give.
Yes, sir.
Same brevity in the interview.
Yes, sir.
You did realize this was a shooting that resulted in someone's death.
Yes, sir.
You obtained these people from the concessionary, correct?
Yes, sir.
You would agree that there was an excess of 20 people there in that concessionary.
I don't remember the specific number, sir. There were several people in that area. That's the number that's there then.
And then, were you sent home after these interviews?
We completed our interviews and then we were released from the scene by our supervisor.
And can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury how long you were at that scene conducting these 6 interviews?
I had to look at the CAD notes, so I don't have that time frame in front of me.
Less than an hour?
I think an hour, probably at the minimum.
I know. No further questions.
Cross.
questions, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you. May this witness be released?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you, Sergeant. You're free to go.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Who's next?
Your Honor, the defense would call Deputy Christina Demas. Your Honor, can you approach while I'm doing that?
Sure. Deputy, approach, please, two. Go ahead. Oh, she didn't swear. Right, thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Back, yeah.
I'll do it the right way. I'll do it the right way.
Chief, do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you shall give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes,
Thank you, Deputy Madam Clerk.
I remember how to do it.
Ms. Demas, you finally get on. You've been waiting
Finally.
quite a long time, haven't you?
Yes.
Would you please state your full name for the record? Let's do it right?
Christina Demas.
And how are you employed?
I'm a canine officer with the Pasco County Sheriff's Office.
Would you please give the ladies and gentlemen of the jury some history concerning your law enforcement career with the Pasco County Sheriff's Office?
I will.
That was your only law enforcement position, is that correct?
Canine?
No, I'm talking about, you were never served as a law enforcement officer anywhere else?
No, this is it.
Okay, so let's take it from the very beginning. Let's give the ladies and gentlemen of the jury some background concerning your law enforcement career.
So I'll make it fast. So it's 23 years. I started as a road deputy, and then I went into vice and narcotics as an undercover detective. After that, I was a bailiff, a corporal in the bailiff sector, which is what she does. And then after that, I went to the road, and I worked under the warrants division as a detective. And after that, I tried out for canine, and I've been a canine officer since then.
And what is your rank?
I'm a corporal now.
You're a corporal.
Mhm.
So I will address you as Corporal Dimas.
As of today, yes, I am a corporal.
Today you became a
Today
corporal?
I am it, yes, I'm back as a corporal, yes.
You're back as a corporal?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I'm going to direct your attention to January the 13th of 2014 and ask you if you recall being asked to go to the cop theater that day.
Yes.
Okay. And would you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury who you were with that day when that request was made?
So I was in the warrants division at that time, and I was partnered up with Detective Monty Schuler, who was my partner. We actually rode in the same vehicle together all the time. I was never alone. I was never by myself.
And so once you got the call, you both went together to the cop theater?
That is correct. So we were in the vehicle in Zephyr Hills, and the call came out, and we decided that we would go at that moment in time.
Okay. And when you got there, what area of the complex of the cop theater did you drive to?
So we drove around somebody was actually standing outside directing us exactly where to go. So we responded to the rear of the movie theater, to a door that led into one of the movie theaters itself.
And is it true that while you were there in the rear of the theater, that you were able to see Mr. Reeves coming out of the theater in handcuffs? Is that correct?
That is correct. As I arrived and walked up the sidewalk area towards the door, they were coming out with Mr. Reeves.
And you would agree that Mr. Reeves was cooperative?
He was.
Okay. And so at that point in time, you decided that you were going to proceed into the theater, correct?
That is correct.
And you opened the door to the theater and you looked inside.
I did.
And you would agree that it was pitch black?
So it was black because I was coming in from a very sunny day. So if the lights were on, I wasn't sure at that moment in time. I had to let my eyes adjust.
And you did that?
I did.
You let your eyes adjust, and then you actually went in, is that correct?
I did.
Okay. And when you finally went in, what were the lighting conditions once you got that adjustment made?
I don't remember at that moment in time. I know that eventually the lights were on.
Okay, so at some point in time after you enter the theater, your belief is that the lights went on?
The lights were on at some point in time. I just never paid attention until at that moment.
Okay. And then it was rather light in there?
It was.
Okay. Now, light enough certainly for you to be able to do your job, right?
Correct.
Okay. And so the job that you were given initially when you went in was what?
I asked if anybody needed assistance, and they handed me a roll of yellow sheriff's office tape, and I proceeded to tape off the area of which the incident had occurred.
Okay. And you did that alone?
I did.
Okay. Now, while you were there in the theater, you saw a group of people, meaning patrons of the theater, congregating in one section of the theater. Would you agree?
They were on the ramp area on the side of the movie theater.
And did you approach those individuals to make sure that you told them that, hey, don't discuss anything you saw in reference to this incident amongst yourself?
I did not.
Okay. And you would agree that likewise you never overheard anybody doing the same?
That is correct.
Okay. Now, you were in that area for what purposes other than putting the yellow tape?
That was the only reason.
That was the only reason? 'Cause nobody gave you any other assignments, correct?
Correct, at that moment.
And you were kind of just waiting for some of the brass to do just that, right?
I was waiting for whoever was in charge at that moment to tell me.
Give you instructions.
Correct.
You're there to help, right?
Correct.
And you would have helped, right?
Correct.
You would have done anything possible
Yes.
to make sure that this investigation was a good one.
Yes.
There was a lot of people in that theater.
There was. Not in the theater, that theater, but out in the, yes, throughout the entire movie theater, yes.
Now, there was quite a few officers. You saw at least 10 police officers,
10
right?
that I can remember.
Okay. And of those 10 that you saw, you never saw a single police officer making any statement to lay people to, you can't be talking, guys, let's separate you, right?
I did not at that moment, no.
Did you know that there was, what, 16 theaters in that building?
I actually did not.
And so you're asked by another officer to hand out some voluntary statement forms, correct?
Correct. So after I marked off the tape, I went outside into the, I guess it's the open area where the concession stand is. And I asked if anybody needed assistance, and they provided me a stack of written statements and pens and said, there are people sitting in the concession stand at the tables, could you please hand them out to them?
Now, the instructions that you were given were not, however, separate all these people and then have them write their statement.
No, the people were already sitting at the tables. There was 4 or 5 chairs around every circular table, and there was about 4 or 5 tables.
And so you're just handing out these voluntary statement forms to these individuals as they're sitting all in a round table.
I am.
You don't know what the people were talking about, but clearly they were talking.
People were talking, I just didn't hear what they were saying.
That process didn't take a whole lot of time, did it?
It did not.
And when you were finished with that process, you were told, and your partner was told,
Objection, hearsay.
Sustained.
well, let me ask you this question. How long were you there? at the cop theater rendering assistance as a law enforcement officer in this investigation?
Between 45 minutes to 1 hour.
And before you left, you wanted to make sure that your services weren't needed, right?
Correct. I walked outside of the front door where the higher-ups were and asked if anybody else needed assistance, and we were told no more assistance was needed.
And in 45 minutes to an hour, you were sent away.
We were sent home.
I don't have any further questions.
You were talking about the house lights coming on. Would you agree with me that the best evidence as to when the house lights came on would be on the video?
Oh, I would have no idea. I've never even seen the video before.
Okay, so what I'm saying is when you say that you think that the house lights came on at a certain point, the video would be the best evidence as to when the house lights came on.
I would assume the video would show it.
Okay. And you indicated that you were there for 45 minutes to an hour and then you were told that you could leave.
That is correct.
And is that because all of the detectives from the sheriff's office had already come down to do their investigation?
At that moment in time, almost all of the east side and the west side major crimes detective had arrived on scene and they were already conducting their investigation.
Okay. So in other words, the reason you were told it was okay to leave within 45 minutes to an hour is you weren't needed because all the investigators were there that needed to be there.
Objection calls for speculation.
To the extent she knows, overruled.
You can answer.
Oh, okay. That they didn't tell me why, they just told me I was free to leave.
Okay, but you know that all the detectives from the east and west side that would investigate a case like this were at the scene or at least on the way to the scene.
For the most part, yes.
I don't have any further questions.
May this witness be released?
She's under subpoena, Your Honor, but we're going to release her with that caution.
Okay.
You can call her back.
Perfect.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're free to go. But subject to recall.
Thank you, Corporal.
You're very welcome.
All right. Council, good time for a lunch break? All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take an hour for lunch. Remember my instructions during the recess. Don't do any independent research of any sort. Don't discuss the facts of the case amongst yourselves or with anyone else. And enjoy your lunch. And report back to the jury pool room at, yeah? Hang on. Over an hour. Be back at 1 o'clock if you would, please, and remember my instructions. Enjoy your lunch. Thank you.